Okay, well, it's right at 1 o'clock, so we're going to get started. I know that everybody's time is valuable here, so I will be as concise and as brief as possible as I present this material to you. This is an update for our Gold Star clients, and also we have some friends of Gold Star Medical on the call who are not clients but have been associated with Gold Star in various ways throughout the years, and so I felt it was important enough to invite some other folks here to the webinar um, to listen to this presentation so you would also be aware of some of the upcoming changes that will be taking place in the next 2 weeks. So this update is in reference to the ICD10 coding system, which are the stands for the International Classification of Diseases, the 10th revision, clinical modifications. Basically, in a nutshell, what that means is your diagnosis codes, the ones that doctors use, okay? And so, as most of you know, let me get my screen to start working here. Okay, here we go. Basically, you know, just giving a little bit of background to anybody, I won't assume that you know what ICD-10 is, so I'm just going to give you a little bit of background on ICD-10. Basically, the ICD International Classification of Diseases coding system is the one that we in the United States use to document the reason for a patient encounter, okay, i.e. diagnosis codes. As you know, when we submit a claim to an insurance company, that claim has to be based on what the insurance carriers deem to be medically necessary services. And so in order to prove medical necessity, you first have to have a diagnosis that would warrant the necessity for the treatment that you're rendering, and on top of that, you would have to have documentation to support that diagnosis. So that is the ICD coding system. This is actually an international coding system that is not used for billing purposes anywhere else in the world, but it is used in the United States. We basically adopted this coding system, so we did not have to create one ourselves. Why reinvent the wheel? This coding system is actually used throughout the world to define diseases, keep statistics of diseases and mortality rates of certain types of diseases, and it helps worldwide to identify epidemics that may be taking place, in regional epidemics or pandemics. Also, these statistics are used by pharmaceutical companies and medical technology companies to develop new technology for treatment of patients. So the ICD coding system is a very rich coding system. In the early 1970s, I believe, I don't have the dates because I'm not doing an ICD-9 class, but in the 1970s, the ICD-9 coding system was introduced into the United States as the system for diagnosis coding. In 1988, that became mandatory for Medicare. Now, the problem with the ICD-9 coding system is that there were essentially 13,000 codes. They were fairly non-specific codes, and when the ICD-10 code set came about, it expanded the code set to initially 63,000 codes, and now the code set is expanded to about 75,000 codes. And where the expansion took place was in the specificity of the diagnosis. So many of the diagnosis codes that we used prior to ICD-10 were fairly non-specific codes. Because of this incredible expansion of the code set and the fact that it was mandated that on October 1st of 2015 we would be utilizing the code set, there was sort of an outcry from the medical community, and so the AMA and CMS announced an agreement to offer what was deemed a grace period for the implementation of ICD-10. Now, that did not delay the ICD-10 implementation. That went forward. But what it did is it created a one-year period starting October 1st of 2015, extending to September 30th of 2016, Medicare claims would not be denied solely on the specificity of the ICD-10 diagnosis codes provided as long as the physician submitted an ICD-10 code from an appropriate family of codes. So basically what that meant was that, you were using the non-specific ICD-9 codes. If you translated those codes over to ICD-10, it would give you a fairly non-specific code. And an example of this, I'll show you here in just a second. It also established an ICD-10 ombudsman, and the word ombudsman basically stands for someone to oversee this program, the grace period program, to help receive and triage physician and provider problems that would need to be resolved during the transition. The doctor who was in charge, the ombudsman for ICD-10 was Dr. Williams out of Georgetown University. I don't remember his first name off the top of my head, but he basically oversaw this entire system and helped physicians groups, the AMA, CMS work out the bugs and the kinks within the ICD-10 system. And basically it also allowed advance payments if Medicare contractors could not process claims within the established time limits due to problems with the ICD-10 implementation. Well, one of the things that the Ombudsman determined was that the grace period would end indeed on October 1st of this year. So that there is no extension of the grace period. As the ramifications of the grace period came out, most of the commercial payers basically followed the same guidelines for the Medicare grace period. So that meant that claims submitted between October 1st of last year and September 30th of this year that were not coded to the highest level of specificity, and for the next 2 weeks that are not coded, would not be rejected. Claims also submitted between October 1st and September 30th that were not coded to the highest level of specificity would not be subject to post-payment recoupments based solely on the non-specific code. Now, you could still get recoupments against your documentation if your documentation didn't support the code, but the code itself would not cause a post-payment audit or recoupment. Providers and coders were also able to basically use a general ICD-9 to ICD-10 code transition really without fear of penalty. So let me show you an example of this. A real common one for chiropractic is sciatica. The ICD-9 code was one code, 723.4, which was sciatica. Now, when that code was directly mapped, or a general equivalence mapping, or a GEM, would be coded directly from the 723.4 to ICD-10, the code that would be given would be M54.30, sciatica unspecified side. Okay, now under the grace period, this would be an acceptable code to bill. However, that's ending. And so if you were to go to any ICD-10 code book and look up the code M54.3, which is the sciatica family, you'll see that there are 6 codes that you can choose from. All right, and the reason why this is not an acceptable code after October 1st is because there are quite more specific codes to deal with the sciatica. And so you have sciatica with low back pain and sciatica without low back pain. Those are 2 families. And then you also have the right side, the left side, and unspecified side. So you would need to be, after October 1st, you will need to be much more specific. If you're currently coding using this code to send out your claims for patients with sciatica, these claims will get rejected, and you will have to, and if not rejected, if it is still considered a billable code, they will be subject to audit and delays in processing, as you'll have a tremendous increase in requests for doctor's notes and so on and so forth. So under the grace period, this code would be acceptable to bill, but as after close of business on Friday, September 30th, if you work on that next Saturday, or on the 1st of October, or more likely Monday, October 3rd, you will need to make sure that you understand clearly the ramifications of utilizing non-specific diagnosis codes within your conditions. All right, so what I'm going to show you now is just a smattering of probably the most common changes or the most significant changes that would apply to chiropractors. For those of you who are code geeks, you know, and you actually have an entire ICD10 code book, there are 20 chapters to the code book, and 21 chapters, excuse me, and the chapter that deals with the musculoskeletal conditions is chapter 13. And we call it the M chapter because all of the codes in this chapter begin with the letter M. So these are the most common codes that the chiropractors use, such as the M99 codes that we use to illustrate a segmental dysfunction of a joint, and so, but these M codes are the ones that I'm showing you here are the codes that would have the most significance to chiropractors. There are other codes in the M chapter or in chapter 13 that have additions and deletions, and now these additions and deletions will be effective October 1st. Okay. So for any of you docs who are listening in, and if you do any work on TMJ, you must make sure that you are not using the TMJ disorder unspecified code anymore. The M26.60 code is going to be deleted. It won't even be available for you to use. If you use that code and it gets billed, the good news about deleted codes, if there is anything good about it, the good news with the deleted codes is that more than likely these codes will not even get past the clearinghouse. The clearinghouses will have the new code set, you know, loaded into their systems, and so if that code hits the clearinghouse, it will probably just get rejected and rejected back to you. However, there are non-specific codes that are still billable codes, and there are certain times when a non-specific code it's proper to use a non-specific code. However, during the course of patient treatment, it's not. You know, you would only use a non-specific code if you have not rendered a diagnosis or have received, you know, your diagnostic results back from that patient encounter. So typically you're not going to use those non-specific codes. Non-specific codes would actually pass through the clearinghouse and be received at the carrier site, but more than likely because of the ending of that grace period, those would be flagged for additional notes, okay, and additional documentation, and you certainly don't want to go there. So any codes that are deleted, you know, you have to pay very special attention to. More so than even than the TMJ disorders that we have quite a bit of a change in are your disc disorders, your mid-cervical disc disorders. There is quite a change in this, and I'm going to point this one out as well. Now these aren't the only changes, obviously, but I can't spend, you know, I know your time is precious, and but as far as the M chapter goes, which is chapter 13, this is going to be fairly significant for any of you who code cervical disc displacement, or more likely cervical disc degeneration. That's a fairly common code that chiropractors will use, especially with Medicare patients, and also the other cervical disc disorders. So you will notice that the codes that are in red are codes that as of October 1st will be deleted. So you will not be able to just indicate that there is cervical disc degeneration at the mid-cervical region. You will have to indicate the precise location of that degenerated disc. It's going to be C4, C5, C5, C6, or C6, C7. And again, you'll see that the M50.32 code is deleted, but they have now added 4 codes to replace that, and one of them is unspecified level. Okay, now can you use the unspecified level? It is a billable code. However, if you use that code, more than likely you are going to be flagged for additional notes and documentation to specify the actual region or the actual vertebral level of the spine where that disc degeneration is taking place. So not only are your diagnosis codes need to be more specific, but your documentation will need to be more specific, because remember, everything you indicate on a claim as far as a diagnosis must be mirrored in your documentation, and if it's not, then in the event of an audit, and we know that audits are on the rise and they will continue to be on the rise because there's big money to be made in audits, and unfortunately as chiropractors we are pretty much at the top of the list as far as poor documentation goes. Documentation, insufficient documentation, or no documentation is the #1 reason that we have claims that are denied post-payment or recouped. And so we have to be very, very careful about this and make sure that we shore up our documentation significantly to indicate the different regions and levels of the spine that are being treated. I mean, we're supposed to be doing it anyway. We're supposed to be listing the precise level of subluxation in a Medicare claim in our documentation. But now your diagnosis codes at the cervical level, now they haven't done this at the thoracic or lumbar levels, but at the cervical level they have now done this at the mid-cervical region. So you're going to have to make sure that your documentation and your diagnosis coding follows suit as of October 1st. And I would just recommend start now and get into the practice of it. Okay, so some general guidelines as far as this transition goes from the grace period to the falling from grace period or non-grace period, whatever you want to call it. Codes that are indicated in the new code set with the word add. So for example, going back to this code M50.221, other cervical disc displacement at C4, C5 level. This is a code that is effective October 1st. Don't start using it now, okay? Because it is not part of the 2016 code set. It is part of the 2017 code set, okay? So don't use those codes until after 10/1. Codes that are indicated with the word revised may be used. A revised code usually means that the description of the code will change on October 1st, but not the code itself. Now, with that said, you'll have to look at those codes that are revised and verify that the code now will meet the description of the condition you're treating, and your documentation meets the description as well. Okay? Make sure that your office manager, and I've also advised the billers, the Gold Star billers, to check with their practice management software company and make sure that they're providing you with an update to the code set. Okay, and that update should be run after close of business on September 30th and before start of business on October 3rd. So sometime during that weekend or that Friday evening, you should run your software update to the new code set. The deleted code should be removed from the database to avoid incorrect billing. Docs, my recommendation also would be to look at your top 25 codes that you routinely use. Now, what I talked about today was just some of the code changes from chapter 13, and I'll be talking about some of the code, some of the things you need to be aware of in chapter 19, which is the code for injury and poisoning, which are the S codes that we also use routinely. But really look at your top 25 codes that you routinely use. Check the database, the revision database, for deletions, additions, or revisions to those codes. So I am going to, at the end of this presentation, there's going to be a link that you can copy and paste into your web browser, and it will pull up an Excel spreadsheet, and that spreadsheet has every single chapter of the code book. I know some of the chiropractors that are on this call, some of you bill for things like, you are a chiropractic neurologist, and so you may have codes that are outside of the M chapter that you utilize routinely. Make sure you check those codes to see if there are any additions, deletions, or revisions to that code set, okay? I obviously wasn't able in this presentation to address all of them, okay? If you treat any conditions that involve laterality, right side, left side, and bilateral, after 10.1, you must indicate laterality both in the code and in your supporting documentation. And in general, when you're looking at laterality, any codes that end in the number 1 are going to represent the right side of the body. Number 2 will be the left side of the body, and number 3 would be a bilateral. So there are some codes that end in the number 3 that indicate bilateral, meaning you're treating both sides. However, like for example, TMJ does have a bilateral component to it. But if no bilateral code exists, then you would have to code both the right side and the left side if you're treating a condition bilaterally. Okay, and again, I'm going to open this up for any questions at the end of the presentation. All right, so let's talk about the S codes. This is the chapter that deals with our sprains and strains. All right, these were the 847 codes in ICD-9, and 800 codes were codes that related back to injury and poisoning. The S codes relate back to chapter 19 of the ICD-10 code book, and it relates back to injury and poisoning. Now, the major change that, fortunately, as I was looking through the database, most of the changes in the S codes really were not pertinent to chiropractic. The sprain strain codes I did not see in the revision database as having any changes to them. So that's good news. There were changes in the S03 family, which are the sprains and dislocations of jaw, and that would correlate with the TMJ, the changes to the TMJ treatment as well. So sprains and dislocations of jaw, there are some additions and deletions. So if you treat jaw problems that are a result of a sprain strain, then you need to look at that chapter and that segment of revision to see what those revisions are, okay? But one of the things that is going to change as this grace period ends is going to be the necessity to use an external cause of injury code when the S code is in the primary position. Okay, so I'm going to actually read you from the chapter itself, from the actual code book. I have in front of me my ICD-10 code book, okay? And Coding 101 basically says that if you have a chapter, when you're looking at a code, you look at the beginning of the chapter for any notes, okay, that are chapter specific, meaning that if the note is immediately below the beginning of the chapter and the note is prior to any codes, then that note applies to the entire chapter and every code in it. So Chapter 19, Injury, Poisoning, and Certain Other Consequences of External Causes. That is the description of the chapter. And then immediately under that, it says in red, note, use secondary code from Chapter 20, External Causes of Morbidity, to indicate cause of injury. All right, it's very clear. It is telling you for every code for any time you use this code, you are going to have an external cause code. And during the grace period, we were seeing claims pass without external cause codes. It is my understanding that this will end as of October 1st. So please be very careful. If your primary diagnosis is a sprain strain, make sure that you are taking a good enough history with the patient to find out the cause and what the patient did for that sprain strain to happen. Now, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about external causes because I think sometimes we have a little bit of a misunderstanding on what that actually is. But external causes can be a number of different things. So, for example, a lot of times when we think about external cause, we think about car accidents, but it's much, much more than that. As the code set for ICD-10 expanded, so did the external causes. I mean, you can get really, really detailed. So, for example, In the chapter, in chapter 20, we have the V through Y codes, okay? And the V codes are generally accidents, okay, of certain types. So V00 through V09 codes would represent pedestrian accidents. In the external cause codes, the 7th character extension applies. So you always would need that 7th character extension in the external cause code. So for example, V01.01 XA, X is the placeholder that we use to get ourselves out to the 7th character extension. This would be an accident of a pedestrian on roller skates injured in a collision with a bicycle in a non-traffic accident initial encounter. So if your patient comes in, with a low back strain because they were roller skating or they were at the skate park and they ran into someone on a bicycle, or the bicycle ran into them, then that would be the external cause code that you would use in conjunction with that low back strain, okay, or that low back sprain. You have, pedal cycle accidents. So if you were the bicyclist and you were injured with the pedestrian or an animal in a non-traffic accident, this would be the code you would use, and so on and so forth. So you have accidents if you're a motorcycle rider, if you're a three-wheel motorcycle, accident, and then the car occupant accidents are your V40 through V49 codes, and those would be used mainly in your personal injury claims, but they can also be used on your medical claims as well. These are the ones that I think we, don't think about. So, a lot of times a patient comes in and it's wintertime, you're up in Iowa or in Nebraska, and your patient comes in, they were shoveling snow or they walked out of the house and they tried to walk down their step and they slipped on the ice, okay? So fall from stairs and steps due to ice and snow, initial encounter. So these would be the types of things that you would have to find out from the patient, and your staff would need to find out during pre-consult if there was anything that caused that acute back pain. What did you do? What happened to you? Okay, and where were you? Exposure to inanimate mechanical forces. Maybe it was an athletic injury, like they were struck by a baseball or they were kicked by a horse. I mean, some of us practice in rural areas and we do see patients, farmers come in, they got kicked by their horse, So these are the types of external causes that we need to be looking at to code in conjunction with the sprain-strain codes, okay? W50 through X91 are external causes relating to drowning and burns and forces of nature. Maybe occasionally you'll use those, but really probably not too much. If you have a patient that comes in with a sprain or strain as a result of assault, then you would want to look at the X92 through Y08 codes, and please check your state laws for reporting requirements, because you may need to report to authorities if you use any of those external cause codes, especially when you're dealing with children or women. So be careful about that. And the Y93 through Y99 codes are activity codes and place of occurrence codes. Now, you have to be careful. These are not external cause codes, okay? So you cannot use an activity code or a place of occurrence code as an external cause code. They cannot be used alone. They must be used in conjunction with an external cause, okay? And so the activity codes would be something like digging, shoveling, raking, okay? And that would not be considered an external cause. You would have to have another external cause, okay? All right, I'm going to talk to you just about some resources real quick that you can obtain to get more information about this. Dr. Mario Fucinari has a wonderful booklet called the ICD-10 coding of the top 100 conditions for the chiropractic office. He had this was out last year. He has updated it with all the new codes. This is probably right now anyway the only one that's available just specifically for chiropractic that I would recommend. Of course, you have the 2017 ChiroCode desk book, but unfortunately that will not be released until mid-December. I've got mine pre-ordered for my staff and myself. You know, you can, and also you can download the updated guidelines from either the CDC website, okay, or the CMS website, and I've provided the links for you, so all you'll have to do is copy paste those links and you can get the full set of revisions to add to your coding manual. But I would recommend, because the code changes are so significant, I would recommend that you get your billing office and yourselves a new 2017 code set. Again, not use the 2016 code set because of the significant deletions that have taken place. Okay, so this concludes the presentation at this point. What I'm going to do is I'm going to unmute everybody and open this up for any questions that you might have or any comments that you might have. Okay? All right, so everybody is unmuted. And if you do have a question, please let us know who you are. Hello? We're having a hard time hearing you. So do we have any questions? Okay, well, I'm going to assume that we have no questions. If you do, wait a second, we do have something here. Hold on a second. Dr. Mario is actually on the call. Oh my gosh, I'm glad I didn't know that. I would have been so nervous. Okay, so for people on the call, if they use the promo code SAVE5 on checkout, they will get a discount. Okay, so if you're on the call and you want to order one of Dr. Mario's books, please go ahead and go ahead and get on the website. His website is askmario.com, and order your book, and you will save some money on it. So that's awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Mario. Dr. Mario, did you have anything that you might want to add to what I've said, or if you have any? Also, since Dr. Mario, since you're on, if you're doing any additional webinars on this, let me unmute you, and you can let them know about that. Can you hear me? Okay, I guess he's still muted, but all right. So since we don't have any questions, I'm going to go ahead and conclude the call. Again, this is going to be recorded. So if you have a client, and your client, you can ask your client if you're a biller on this call. I know some of my billers, actually we had a call earlier today about this, but some of them decided to be on the call as well. I'm going to be asking all of the billers to find out if their clients were on the call, and if they weren't, we'll make sure that the clients receive a recording of it. So I want to thank everybody for your time today, and I hope these highlights have at least opened your eyes to some of the changes that are going to be taking place in the next 2 weeks. Thank you, everybody, and have a blessed day.